Welcome back. I'm Tedward, and welcome to the 2024 Chevrolet Blazer EV RS all-wheel drive. You can get this in a rear-wheel drive variant or the all-wheel drive variant. This one, as it sits, we'll get this out of the way, is $60,000 with some options and destination. It's a lot of money, so if you're going to be looking at one of these, you should know what you're getting, and that's what we're going to do today. We're going to take a walk around the car, we're going to go for a drive, see how it handles and behaves. This is an Ultium platform EV, so we should be pretty familiar with this. We've driven the Equinox, we've driven Hummers, we've driven Silverados, all the goods. Crazy lighting design on this vehicle, but this is a little more grown up and larger than the Equinox. So if you need the space, this is probably the direction you're going to go. Has an 85 kilowatt hour battery, a range of 279 miles with the all-wheel drive. If you go for the rear-wheel drive, you'll get about 319, I believe. So not crazy, but definitely on par and gonna get you far. So if you need something really wild, then you go for the Silverado EV that'll do 450 miles, some crazy numbers posted with a lot of batteries. But what you need to know, if you're new to the EV game, and you're hearing all these facts and figures and they don't make sense to you, let me break it down for you. So kilowatt hours is basically your fuel tank. That's how many gallons you can store in this thing. So kilowatt hours is how much energy you can store in that battery. Kilowatts is the flow rate that it will accept. So this is 150 kilowatt charge speed on a DC fast charger. Some are capable of like 350 kilowatts. That means they're going to charge faster. That means when you're on that road trip and you pull off to a DC fast charger, how much juice can you get into this thing? How many miles can you add to the range in the shortest amount of time? And your efficiency is going to be measured in how many miles per kilowatt hour you get. So instead of miles per gallon, you're doing miles per kilowatt hour. So if you can manage, let's say, 3 miles per kilowatt hour, and you have 85 kilowatt hours of battery, you multiply the numbers and that's your range. And this one makes around 300 horsepower, 0 to 60 in about 6.5 seconds. So it's not a track star. You're not going to be promoting those numbers, but that's what I'm liking about Chevy EVs, is that they're not trying to wow you with some absurd 0 to 60 time. They're actually just trying to make a decent car that you can share with your family and your kids, because I'm telling you, if you've got a Model S Plaid, you don't want to hand the keys to that to a 17-year-old with their friends. Like, it just seems like a disaster. These are, of course, laden with wild safety features. It's going to try to give you all the blind spot monitoring and stuff. But first, let me show you this rubber. On this 6-lug 21-inch wheel, we have 275 section tires, and this to me is one of the biggest mistakes of EVs right now. Is just, we need more sidewall. I don't need a big fancy futuristic looking wheel. I think the Silverado is on 24s, and that really contributes to a pretty harsh ride. They're already going to be heavy cars. So I do think that in addition to kind of dialing in the suspensions, it would behoove automakers to go back to a 19-inch wheel with some juicy sidewall to try to absorb some things. Not to mention the fact that one of the ways they get a lot of range out of these vehicles is they go with an EV-style tire. And an EV-style tire is going to have lower rolling resistance, so that way it's not taking as much energy to turn it. But there's always a byproduct in that. We can get deeper into tires in another video, but essentially, if you have less rolling resistance, it means it's less sticky. So it's going to be a little harder, which will impact handling, which is why when you do handling tests in these cars, you usually hear them really screaming and screeching. And yes, part of it is contributed to higher weight in these vehicles because they've got to lug around all this battery, but it's also because the tires are just not super sticky. They're not going to be like a slick. This is not on the NACS platform yet, so you're not using a Tesla style charger, you're using a CCS fast charger. There you go. And that's going to work at, everywhere. You can always put an adapter on it if you go to a Tesla supercharging station, but that's going to work at your EVgo, your Electrify America, all the usual suspects, including ChargePoint. And kind of trick the way this goes up and down. I always do get a little worried. This is the thing. I'm glad it has normal door handles, but this, living in New England, my cars will just get completely iced over in the winter. So I do have some concerns about this, but I think it's probably fine. Let's take a look in the rear and then we'll jump into the back. I do think that the style of this thing is really nice. We've got the black bow tie, kind of reminds me of like a Camaro. It makes a lot of noises. Sometimes I don't know what all the noises are. I don't know. Does it have this? Can I kick? I don't think so. It's just... All right. Back here, you can tell that I was charging on the wall charger. I did have an issue with this, but it wasn't its fault. What happens is this was like there, and you know, you can swap out different plugs because you can put this on a 240. But what happens is if this is here and it looks like it's plugged in, it just blinks orange and then won't charge. It really needs to be in there tight. So that was the culprit, and then it charged very, very slowly. I got about 30 miles overnight. That's just on 110, but you know, if you had a level 2 charger in your home, well, then you'll be in business. I do not, because we just have RAV4 primes. We don't need super fast charging. If you plug one of those in, it is topped off overnight, not a big deal. In the back, with this wild red interior, nice rear seat, and a proper floor, which is, there's no hump, right? There's no drive line that goes back there. So it's nice, like the old days of GM vehicles. You'd have some big giant hump back here. Nope, no such worry for that, because, well, you've got a motor up front and motor in the back. I like the way they've done these because they've got this like sort of suede Alcantara style that locks you in place. So while you don't have big side bolsters, you don't get jostled around too much. So it's okay. Back here you have outboard heated rear seats and 2 USB-C charging ports. Lovely to see some HVAC system controls, or at least vents back here, because, you know, in Hondas, lower end Hondas, there is no HVAC in the rear. You've got to rely on what's coming from the front. Up here, there is no moonroof. No moonroof. And this is where I'm like, you know, I don't fully get this, because the Equinox, the Chevy Equinox that I drove, had a giant retractable moonroof, and I thought it was beautiful. Not to mention, it had Super Cruise. And when we pop in here, you'll notice no Super Cruise. Now, I've seen like mixed things. When I go on the website, I don't think I could find it. I could be wrong. There might be Super Cruise available, but I have not seen it on this Blazer RS trim level as an option. It does have a heads-up display and some other fun things like that, but what I've not seen is the Super Cruise, which I think is like kind of wild that on the larger vehicle that costs 60 grand versus the smaller one that costs less, that wouldn't have Super Cruise. So like I said, I could be wrong about that, but sometimes I get a little confused with GM's portfolio and what you can mix and match. Let's take a look up front and see if there's anything to be witness of up here. And there you go. Just a big old flat spot with a fire helmet over here, probably an emergency kill switch. Let's find out. Well, that's not easy to get to. There you go. Yeah, probably just pop that out when anything goes wrong. But no frunk to be found, just some brake fluid. So, up front, clever design. Not much of a grille because you're not cooling an engine up here, but you do have these kind of clever pass-throughs. There's a lot of fun aerodynamic design that seems to go into these EVs, and I think they have a lot of fun styling them when they create it. Up here, there's a big light bar that goes across the front. Even this bow tie lights up, and there's quite a light show when you're charging it, although you have to either turn it on or turn it off. What I thought was that when I'd plug it in, it would just maybe show me that for a minute and then stop. But no, it just goes all night. And I don't want to be blinding my neighbors with the rear tails and the front going. So I just had to turn it off through the menu because that would get a little annoying. You've got cameras all over the thing, on the mirrors, in the front, in the back. So it does a great job of allowing you to park in tight spaces and know when you're about to hit something you're not supposed to hit. In the cabin, we're greeted with a pretty familiar sight now. We're used to Chevy EVs at this point, and you've got your main screen here, and then you've got your infotainment screen over here. To start them, no start-stop button to be found. We'll close the door. We'll put our foot on the brake, And boom, there we are. It is started. If you want to turn it off, this took me a little while to find, because there are times when you're like, I don't want my car on and I don't have a button. Well, you do have a button. It's over here on the screen. Vehicle off. So if you were curious how to turn your Blazer off without just getting out, because otherwise you put it in parking, you get out. But if you've just gotten in the vehicle, you haven't gone anywhere, and then you get out, it's on. And you know, you're going to have to figure that out. So foot back on the brake, car jumps to life. And there you go. There are some dings that just annoy me, like like it's saying, hey, put on your seatbelt. Like, give me a second, I just got in. Nice features here. Okay, so we have HVAC controls on buttons, and on the touch screen, you get your heated and ventilated seats. I love a ventilated seat. That's a big one for me. We'll go to vehicle status, energy info. I like these displays. To put it in reverse, we use this little stock and point it up. Let's go for a little drive and talk about what this thing is about. Now, what you'll notice is there's very little room to see out of the back of this thing. It's a very squinty rear hatch, and there's a tiny, teeny, tiny little wiper back there, which is adorable, but you know, effective enough, I suppose. But thankfully, GM always has the best cameras in the game. These are like nice high definition cameras. You can see the top down view and that good UX. I really dig this, and away we go. All-wheel drive system does a pretty darn good job of putting the power down. You might hear a little bit of chirping, but that, like I said, because of the sort of EV low rolling resistance tires, that's what's going to happen there. But it's fast enough. I mean, it's definitely going to go. And here's the difference. When you hear a 0 to 60 time from an ordinary car, an ICE car, it may not actually mean what you think it means, because let's say it's a manual transmission and someone says it'll do 0 to 60 in 4.5 seconds. Well, that is 4.5 seconds with a very aggressive 1-2 or possibly even 1-2-3 shifting that you would never do to your own car. You would never take your Toyota Celica GTS and just like blast through gears, because you probably shatter the transmission. It's not going to take it very well. But in an EV, there's no gearing. It's 1-to-1, unless it's a Panamera or a Taycan. Sorry, not Panamera. That does have a 2-speed transmission, as well as the Audi e-tron. Very odd for the EV market to have any kind of staged transmission, but they do. But no, it actually just goes, and you can do it anywhere. And that's why like Teslas are absolute silent killers, because you can repeat those 0 to 60s anywhere, anytime. It's going to do what you ask it to do immediately. So even though it says 6.6, it's an honest 6.6 seconds, because it's actually going to do it anytime you ask it to do it. Now, there is an SS version coming, and that one's going to have like 550 or 580 horsepower, I think, somewhere in that range. I think you could assume that's going to be more in the 4 second to 60 range, and it's probably going to be a little stunner, and that'll be cool to see a faster Blazer out there. In terms of dynamic handling, I think the steering is lovely. It's weighted properly. GM does usually a pretty good job of making sure that their vehicles feel appropriate. And the same goes for their tuning with the braking, because we have regenerative braking, which I love. This is a feature that really gets me going. Ooh, we've got a little R8. V8. Stark 9. Oh my goodness. You can tell they are Iron Man fans. But bad regenerative braking is annoying. Good regenerative braking is great, because it means that you can lift off the pedal without, you can turn right on red here. I'm not doing anything illegal for the Europeans who just cannot fathom a right on red. Good regenerative braking allows you to seamlessly put power back into the vehicle using the kinetic energy that you're bleeding off to slow the vehicle down, instead of transforming it just into heat with the brakes, with the calipers and rotors. But not all regen systems are created equally. This is great because I can lift It's not on the full one pedal driving situation right now, but the way it coasts and still gives me some regen is perfect. And it allows me to drive very smooth. When you have a really aggressive, ugly regen system, it makes you, if you're not a very astute and precise driver on the throttle, you're gonna make all your passengers puke. They're not gonna enjoy driving with you. And GM, I think, just does a pretty darn good job of this. So I'm getting in the brakes. We've got 100 kilowatts going to the battery right now, and then coming to a stop, barely using any brakes whatsoever. So that's a nice thing. You may go through a whole bunch of tires on EVs because of their weight, but you're not gonna go through brakes. GM also always gives you one of these great camera mirrors, which I think is fantastic, especially in this vehicle, because like I said, you don't have much more than a mail slot for a rear view window, and that helps you out just a bit to make sure you've always got some visibility out the rear and it's consistent. It's a pretty smooth ride, but I will say the suspension, it feels like it's not quite dialed in for the weight of the vehicle. It always feels like it's kind of bouncing a little bit. And when you come to a complete stop and you maybe get into the pedal a little hard, it feels like it just kind of rocks back and forth on that suspension a little bit. So I think it's good. I just think it's like just a little bit off. And maybe I wouldn't have noticed it as much, but Honda's Prologue is based off of this vehicle. And I think that Honda Prologue has slightly better suspension tuning. And I'm not wildly impressed with the Honda Prologue either, but I do think that they kind of just tweaked that suspension just a touch to kind of solve that issue. See if we can keep up with an M6. All right, let's get it on the highway where this is probably going to live most of its life, honestly. This is going to be a commuter car. So yes, we want to, of course, evaluate how it's going to behave in performance settings, but they have the yield sign and are not yielding. Out on the highway, it's fairly well insulated. It's a quiet cabin. EVs, unfortunately, they do not do well efficiency-wise with speed. They really just want to go as slow as possible. The more wind resistance you're pushing against, the worse it's going to be for your efficiency. So if you're doing long-range testing on an EV, like, you're going to have to stick to about 70 miles an hour for peak efficiency. The slower you go, the longer you'll go. Let's get our little visor here. But I've got adaptive cruise control as we unfortunately drive into the sun. I'm going 70 miles per hour. We're starting to see our miles per kilowatt hour pick up a little bit because I've done a couple of launches, so I'm killing my efficiency with that. What I like about this car on the highway is the steering. I think the steering is really dialed in for like comfortable cruising. What I mean by that is I've been driving some Nissans lately, and the Nissans, especially the Altima, I felt like it was a very nervous vehicle on the highway. And it felt like if you put in a little bit of steering input, it was rocketing across the highway. And maybe that's where that big Altima energy comes from, but it's uncomfortable. And it felt like I had to follow the car. And that's me. Like, I'm a driver. I love driving. It's what I think about. I do my best to have like precise and, careful throttle control and steering inputs, whereas like I think the average person chewing gum on their phone, drinking a coffee and eating a burger, that's a bunch of disgusting things to do together, but they don't care. They're not thinking about it. That is not the type of driver that's driving those vehicles. So having a steering system that's actually going to allow a little forgiveness without rocketing the car across a lane is wonderful, and it doesn't make you look drunk when you're sober, okay? That's something we really need. Insulation, this is a nice quiet cabin. I'm in a very good place right now. I think this is a great commuter in terms of creature comforts. Now, are there vehicles that could be more efficient? I am sure. But right now, we're focused on the driving experience. I'm a little bummed out at the lack of a big old moonroof and Super Cruise. I think Super Cruise is one of those incredible technologies that just sets Chevrolet apart in such a big way. Hey, there's an old Blazer. All right. Plastic for a window. And nice and slow through here, just in case we get anybody coming through the bike path. Looking good. All right. I actually prefer not having the one pedal driving on at all. I think having the coast function is fantastic, and it still pulls a little bit of regen, which is nice. All right, here's the deal. I like the Blazer. It has a reputation just because of the way it launched, but I think they've solved that. I haven't seen anybody with major issues on these, since that happened. So it seems like all the software stuff is sorted. Great news. The biggest problem with this car right now to me is the Equinox. But if you need the size of the Blazer, the smaller Equinox probably is not in your purview. You're not going to be doing that because you're going to go for the bigger vehicle. I think bang for buck, Equinox is better. I also think that it drives better. I think this is fine, but like it's just not. There's something about it that I just think is a little clumsier than Equinox, and that's really interesting. And this is where my opinion of Chevrolet. I love a good Chevrolet, I do, but they excel so much more in the low end. When you go for more entry-level Chevys, I feel like they are just absolute stars. Whereas when you go for the higher-end stuff, I feel like sometimes the value starts to walk back just a little bit. And there's always this interesting thing that happens with them where you think, wow, this is like the latest and greatest, and all the things they can showcase with their vehicles in these big expensive things. But sometimes it's the low end, the entry level, where they really show what they're capable of. And for me, I think Equinox is really the star. Now, we're going to park this terribly. Let's see. All right, I'll be nice. I'll go between the lines. There you go. You happy? If I don't park between the lines, everybody freaks out. We're in the middle of nowhere. We'll park this. Here's something that I'm saving for last. It does not have Apple CarPlay or Android Auto. I didn't say this at the beginning because I wanted you to see the car drive. And a lot of people will just click away from this if they know that. That does kind of have some annoying repercussions because, first of all, I think there's a great infotainment system. Look, we look at our dashboard here. We've got incredible Google Maps popping up right in front of us. This is beautiful stuff. We've got a few different options here. I do really enjoy this. In fact, I can come over here, put a giant map over here. I can, search for things. All this great stuff is really nice. And because it's native, it has great audio features, microphone. Hopedale Airport.
Okay, I'm setting your destination to Hopedale Airport in Hopedale.
Beautiful. It just works. It just does what it's supposed to do. We like that. And because it doesn't have, Apple CarPlay, I feel like that kind of is allowed. But the thing is, Honda's doing the same thing. Honda is doing native Google systems now, but they have not gotten rid of Apple CarPlay. And I do find it to be troublesome because, while, sure, I've got my phone here, it's connected to Bluetooth, I can play what I need to play, I'm not receiving my text messages in my typical Apple CarPlay way, which encourages me, unfortunately, to maybe pick up my phone when I'm not supposed to. I don't want that. I would rather it just not be an issue, and I don't fully understand. I can't totally wrap my head around this, but I do wish that it still had Apple CarPlay. I would like to say that it doesn't matter, but it does. It matters a little bit. And to some people, maybe they do not care at all. To others, it is a deal breaker. And that is why I think it's weird that they did this, because for some buyers, that might be the one feature that they're absolutely needs to have. And if they don't have them on an entire lineup of vehicles, well, that removes a pretty large amount of buyers. So I can't quite wrap my head around it, but we'll see where it goes. Maybe this is what's going to happen. So that is the Chevy Blazer EV RS all-wheel drive. Just under 280 miles of range, should be plenty to do what you need to do. 150 kilowatt charge speeds, not the fastest, but definitely acceptable and good for most people, especially if you're just charging at home. It doesn't even matter. That's really a road trip thing if you need it. But it'll still add plenty of juice to the tank when you need it to do it in a reasonable hurry. I think it's a well-appointed vehicle. I think I'm really digging what Chevy is bringing to the EV market, because we've been stuck with kind of Tesla, and Rivian is really expensive, and it's nice that we have cars. This feels like a car. I don't have to look at some iPad stuck here in the middle. I can turn this off with a button, or maybe not. Okay, we'll just do this. We'll hit that button there. Come on, there we go. Okay, I'm learning. So, thank you so much for watching, liking, commenting, and subscribing. I'm going to keep my eye out for the SS because, of course, while I think this is the better family car because it's not super powerful, I'm going to want to drive the more powerful SS when it launches, and we'll maybe hopefully get a little track time with it just to see what it can do. Don't forget to respect the drive, and I'll see you in the next one.